She was obviously without a blood circulation at the time. And the reason that she had no circulation is that there was no evidence of blood in the pictures that were taken of those two marks.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and a warm welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. World-famous forensic pathologist Dr. Werner Spitz has died. He was 97 years old and he died in his home in Detroit. If you've never heard that name before, well, you must be very new to true crime. Dr. Spitz has been intimately associated with America's highest profile cases. Sometimes he was seen as a sort of folk hero by the true crime community, such as when he testified for the victorious prosecution in the civil case against O.J. Simpson. Other times, frustratingly, he was hired as an expert defense witness, such as in the Casey Anthony case and the Rebecca Zahau cases, often with devastating legal consequences. In the JonBenet Ramsey case, Spitz disagreed with the official coroner's report in several areas. In this episode, we want to examine what he said about a fairly obscure and much underestimated aspect in the Ramsey case, the twin marks on JonBenet's back. What did Dr. Spitz think caused them? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, I've written many books on this case, so I've certainly gone through it back to front, inside and out. If you're interested in those books, I'll put a link to them on Amazon in the description. If you're enjoying this analysis, you can like, share, leave a comment. Please also consider hitting the thanks button, and let's get started. In episode 2 of the CBS documentary, The Case of JonBenet, Dr. Spitz makes a potentially game-changing assessment of JonBenet's marks. He says that these marks were made after JonBenet had died. Now, that alone changes everything, if Spitz is correct. If the marks were made when JonBenet was alive, doesn't it suggest they were made by a stranger and an intruder? One can almost imagine the stranger going up to her bedroom and using some kind of device while she's alive to sort of take control of her. If the marks were made subsequently, and if they were made, let's say, using a toy, it suggests a crude attempt to revive the 6-year-old. Which of these scenarios is more likely? Now, I don't want to deal with the deeper inferences that Dr. Spitz drew, or for that matter, the track the documentary went down. For his views on this, Dr. Spitz was sued for $150 million in 2016, and the documentary appeared in for $750 million. So you can see quite a lot was at stake in terms of his opinion. What I do want to touch on lightly is in making their argument for when the marks were made, one of the investigators, former detective Jim Kohler, stands in a mock-up of the train room in the basement and he picks up a piece of train track. Later, Dr. Spitz is also seen with a piece of track in his hands. Now, I don't believe JonBenet died in the train room, or for that matter, in the basement. But I do think the train track could well have made those marks. They certainly are the right distance apart. And they are described by some, including Dr. Spitz, as abrasions, not burns. That is also a critical area. Are they abrasions, are they burns, or are they a combination of both? There are only 2 places in the Ramsey house, as far as we know, where these tracks were found. In Burke's train room and in Burke's bedroom. The difference is, in the bedroom the tracks were on the floor, whereas in the train room they are on an elevated table. I have dealt with this issue in a recent video. Now in the train room it would be difficult to either lie on them or to have them nearby, let's say to use on someone lying on the ground under the table. In Bergstrom, they would potentially be a lot closer at hand.
She doesn't seem to be breathing or she's not conscious, then somebody using a piece of train track.
Trying to see if they can get a response or awaken JonBenet.
If Dr. Spitz is right about the wounds, it's a potentially game-changing insight. If he's wrong, then it supports the intruder theory. Let's listen again to what his opinion is on these marks and why he thinks they were inflicted post-mortem.
If you look carefully at those 2 marks in her back, there is a central defect within each of the marks. That defect is from something penetrated through the skin. She was obviously without a blood circulation at the time.
What Dr. Spitz is saying here is that in terms of those marks, the area in the middle isn't showing the sort of coagulation that you would have when a person is alive. And so that is his opinion based on looking at photos for why he thinks what he thinks. Now, a good counter-argument to that is you can't, or can you really make assessments of injuries? Can you make accurate assessments of injuries by simply looking at photos? And so a big difference between Dr. Spitz and, let's say, the coroner, and what the coroner's opinion was, is the fact that the coroner actually had JonBenet in front of him and was able to look at those wounds directly, closely, right? And that is perhaps a significant difference between that and somebody else looking at those wounds on a photograph. And I suppose one could make the same argument with a ransom note. Can you draw the same subtle insights from a second-hand facsimile, basically from a photocopy, compared to the sorts of insights one can draw by looking at the original? The original is always going to provide you with a better version, better, well, it's the authentic version, and so it's going to give you a real sense of what really happened there. And so what did really happen here? When investigators wanted to deal with this question and settle it, and it kind of went on for a year, where they were thinking, could this have been the case? Could it not have? And a big driver of this idea was Lou Smith, who thought he knew exactly what made those marks. And so in order to settle the question once and for all, they decided in January 1998, as I say, almost a year after everything, that they needed to exhume JonBenet to look at those wounds again and to make sure, perhaps to measure them as well. But that never happened. And so this case has remained in a kind of legal limbo, like the entire JonBenet Ramsey case, ever since. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.